r/AskScienceFiction. Johnny_MC2 says, Star Trek, Into Darkness, what was that guy's ring made of that caused an insanely large and destructive explosion by being dropped in a glass of water? In the beginning of the movie, Khan basically forces a Federation officer to carry out a large-scale bombing of a giant secret research facility underneath Federation HQ. He does this by giving the guy a normal-sized ring to wear into the facility without being caught, and then the guy takes a normal glass of water and drops the ring in it, causing some type of insane reaction that created a huge explosion. What the hell was that ring made of? How did Khan even make the ring? Kinda Dutch says, so you're all going on about how the water set it off? What would have happened if the guy was sweating? Anti-theory says, simple, it has to be 2 parts plutonic quarks and 1 part cesium. Forethought says, I want to add, there's no reason to assume the ring was a single explosion that destroyed the facility. As a secret squirrel facility for Section 31, Harewood might have been instructed to either perform some ancillary action or action Sir. G. Lowering the shield of a nearby experimental reactor or weapon or deploy the ring bomb somewhere specific, such that successive detonations and destruction would have been part of a chain reaction. 96-262 says, an inner core of antimatter and an outer antimatter containment system that's soluble in water. Salami Tsunami says, I would guess antimatter and the water was to dissolve the containment device and cause a breach. Oh the wit says, ultra sodium. Dustsnitch says, there was a warp core in there shrunk down to the size of a ring using the shrinking technology from the Deep Space Nine episode 1 Little Ship. The Romulans got access to the tech during some maintenance on the Defiant during the Dominion War, which Nero brought with him when he went back in time to kickstart the Kelvin timeline. Section 31 managed to steal this tech from the Romulan ship during the final battle of the reboot, and then introduced it to Khan while they had him building superships for them. There is no evidence to support any of this. Magic Mulder says, antimatter? Dropping it in water triggered a mechanism that switched off a small force field separating the antimatter from matter. No Shoe 7651 says, we don't actually know what else was in the building. Reactive compounds could have been placed elsewhere. Nothing to say Khan hadn't got a few other people willing to help him. Imperial_Hello reports says, serious answer, there was a guy commenting under one of the clips of this scene who made a whole Google Docs with how the ring cold worked. The innermost layer of the ring is comprised of uranium. The intermediate layer is a soft material that is easy to shoot through, then there's a layer of uranium again, and then there's sodium francium. The ring is coated with a layer of lead that contains the radiation from the uranium. When the ring is dropped into water, it interacts with the francium and it explodes, propelling the outermost layer of uranium through the intermediate soft layer and into the uranium at the center of the ring. Contact between the 2 uranium layers causes a small-scale nuclear reaction which destroys the facility. It's basically a gun-type nuclear bomb in the size of the ring. r/AskScienceFiction. Few Objective 6526 says, Harry Potter, if you throw Voldemort into the sun, would his ghost go back to Earth? If not, would horcruxes decay over time? Psy34 says, Voldemort can't be a ghost due to his meddling with horcruxes and damaging his soul. Staff Sergeant says, I believe he could be resurrected using the fragment of soul contained in one of the horcruxes, but I'm not sure. The idea is that his soul is broken up into multiple pieces. One piece is contained in his body, and the others are inside various artifacts. For instance, he nearly came back in the second book through his horcrux in the diary. r/AskScienceFiction. Lost Specialist 1505 says, MCU does Thor no khonshu in the egyptain pantheon? He mentions the Olympians, Quetzalcoatl and another god. So what about the Enid? Paramisho Antic says, probably, though we didn't see them in Omnipotence City, so they might not be as active these days. I always wondered whether he knew best. r/AskScienceFiction. Aspindler says, Resident Evil 4, why the US government was only able to send a single helicopter to help Leon, even after the location of the president's daughter is confirmed. Darth Tipo 92 says, foreign country without official agreements to allow US aircraft through the airspace. Sending one helicopter is a scouting/aid mission, sending more is a direct violation of sovereign territory and could kick off a larger international incident. Reese 30 Stupid says, A. Sending an army into an ally territory without permission could be seen as an act of war. Its Walian was only meant to be a liaison to the local police department when they were investigating sightings of Ashley in the area. B. Mike was only meant to be a scout. Since Hunnigan knew that the locals were part of a fanatical cult who were extremely hostile, HS orders were to find Leon and report back to Hunnigan. He only had guns in case Leon was being overwhelmed. r/AskScienceFiction. Callie Coven says, MCU, how would the MCU, the narrative, not the individual scripts, have played out differently if the Hulk had all his powers from the comics? 1_hell_of_bird says, he would have ripped Thanos in half. XXX_ejikid_xxx says, Age of Ultron world been a lot different since Tony world never been able to knock out Hulk. Infinity War world ended in the Asgardian ship. Yerklanov says, I mean, there's really only 3 distinct differences between MCU Hulk and 616 Hulk. General power level, healing factor, and his weird astral vision, and instinctive knowledge of how to get back to the test site where he was started, no matter where he is, but meh, that's been downplayed since the MCU started. Power level is the only real distinguishing thing that matters here. If MCU Hulk were as strong as 616 Hulk, things would go drastically differently, especially if the other characters aren't also scaled to their 616 versions, though there's an argument to be made that MCU Cap is stronger than 616, albeit much slower. r/AskScienceFiction. AXA51 says, Truman Show, could Truman get plastic surgery and successfully go into hiding? Thesna Pinning says, sadly I don't think so, as the show was so popular, what surgeon wouldn't at least know his face? Ranquisha says, probably for a short time, but Truman was so famous that his new identity would eventually leak. People were too obsessed with him and spent decades studying every facet of his life and his personality in a way that no other celebrity in history has been observed. Even if he completely altered his appearance, other people would notice the similarities in his actions and mannerisms, and eventually the whole world would know he was Truman. And that's not to say that someone from the very surgical team who performed the operation, to the random people in the building at the same time Truman went in to get the surgery, leaking the information themselves for a payday and a tiny slice of fame connected to Truman. r/AskScienceFiction. Nikipupu69 says, PoTC, at World's End, why doesn't Davey Jones make bucket shoes so he can walk on land? When Jack and Co meet Beckett and Co on that tiny island before the battle, Jones stands in a barrel of water with a few buckets placed behind it so he could walk on land. If that's all it takes, why doesn't he strap buckets of seawater to his legs so he can walk on land? If A94 says, that seems like a massive and very undignified, hassleless solution for a problem I don't think he really cares much about anymore. He doesn't have any need to go to land, nothing he needs to do there, and he probably doesn't want to, if nothing else out of spite. Mac 2028 says, "You may have missed, but that isn't a tiny island, it is a sandbar. A sandbar is covered by water most of the time and doesn't count as dry land, which implies that he had to do several things. Be above the land. It isn't dry land. His actual feet are still in water to get past the curse for long enough to have a meeting." r/AskScienceFiction. AXA51 says, "LOTR, what are all the injuries Frodo received on his journey to Mordor? Both physical injuries, mental trauma." Drafterman says, "Mental trauma, every encounter with an Nazgul, being swallowed by a tree, being trapped in a barrow down, multiple near-death experiences, death of a dear friend, Gandalf, being shown terrible visions of possible futures, facing a giant, eldritch spider, imprisoned by orcs, constant sensation of being watched by a malevolent force, major physical injuries, stabbed by Morgul blade on Weathertop, almost impaled by orc spear wielded by a troll, though the mithril shirt absorbed much of the damage, that still had to have been a hell of a blow, wounded by Shelob, finger bitten off by Garlem." r/AskScienceFiction. Specialist Star 840 says, "LOTR, why do the orcs respect Adar when they hate pretty much everybody else? We see the orcs have respect and reverence for Adar, but then later on they only serve Sauron, Saruman, along with other orc chieftains and kings out of fear. Why is this?" Drafterman says, "He's the only one that has bothered to see or treat them as something other than fodder." Rawsome16 says, "This should more be tagged as ROP and not LOTR, since they are not one and the same. From a LOTR standpoint it doesn't make sense." In _or_res says, "Adar is presumed, or confirmed, I can't remember, to be one of the first created orcs, or some sort of proto-orc. An elf tortured and twisted by Morgoth." AvidRidder10 says, "Even if he doesn't look like them, Adar is one of them, their father, in a sense, and he genuinely seems to care about the orcs and treat them as his children. Sauron and Saruman never made any pretense of caring about the orcs, or treating them as anything other than disposable foot soldiers. They secured the orcs' loyalty through fear and brute power, not love." r/AskScienceFiction. Grap says, "Shazam, when the kids reach adulthood, will their superhero bodies and regular bodies just be exactly the same? In the second movie Mary is played by the same actor in both forms, because she's in her 20s now. Something I was kind of wondering is if her superhero body would still be more muscular, but it's hard to tell, because both her costume and regular clothes fully cover her arms and torso." Lexstrom says, "They're going to be idealized versions of themselves, like they put a filter on. What's going to be interesting-eyed if they keep the power when they are senior citizens and they all turn into perfect young adults again." Custard Donut says, "Their superhero bodies are basically an idealized version of themselves. If they work out and continue to do so into their adult lives, then it's likely they'll have a similar physique to their superhero counterparts." r/AskScienceFiction. Steinman says, "DC, where were Superman and the others during 9/11? If there are modern movies that take place after 2001, is there a canonical answer as to why none of them did anything?" Yerklanov says, "The ongoing continuity at the time didn't deal with the attack. DC did put out an anthology book, but it wasn't in continuity and mostly dealt with normal people, either the firefighters and rescue workers, or the victims and their families. Post-Flashpoint, Superman hadn't been active yet at the time, and there were really no big-name heroes before him, with much of history having been messed with, making it so teams like the Justice Society to have never existed until time was made right again after Rebirth." Intrigued Human 22 says, I'm pretty sure that Superman started going after 9/11. As for others, well, they were probably busy with other stuff. Plus there is a surprisingly small number of heroes operating in New York City. Poorly Drawn Beagle says, due to the sliding timeline, most of them were probably still in their teens. Do Get One says, I like there was number 9/11 in the DCU. Comic books or movies. r/AskScienceFiction. Reese30 Stupid says, Resident Evil 4, what has Ashley been up to since she was rescued from Los Illuminados? She was apparently in her second/third year of college when she was kidnapped. Did she graduate successfully, and if so, what kind of career does she have now? Maybe a spokesperson for an anti-B.0.W. group like TerraSafe? Fallout Fan 01 says, well, American politicians are typically quite wealthy. Her father being president of the United States raked in between $200,000 and $500,000 yearly. So what she majored in is kinda irrelevant. If she made a living with it, great. If not, it's irrelevant. What she did after isn't known, but American media probably paid her for media interviews which she probably donated to some charity. Book deals, movie deals, sponsorship deals. From a strictly economic perspective, being kidnapped was the best thing for her because she never has to worry about money and her whole experience can be profited from. But children of politicians like the position of PoTC typically wouldn't want to or be able to function like a normal person in regards to employment in the real world. Brian 577 says, therapy, lots of therapy. r/AskScienceFiction. Lion_O'Brien says, JJBA is Abdul Muslim? Plus is he mixed black/Arab? Cryptosporidium 137 says, I don't think this is ever explicitly stated, but I believe the assumption is that he's simply Egyptian. We can probably assume that he's Muslim considering his name and where he's from, but that can also be deceiving. He's named after Singaporean Abdul, who is actually Jewish, so not 100% clear. His necklace has the Ankh symbol, which is associated with ancient Egyptian paganism. But Coptic Christians, 10-15% of Egypt's modern-day population, also historically use the symbol, called the crux ansata, so there's an argument that he could be either an pagan of some sort, or simply following traditional folk religion, or be a Coptic Christian. It's also possible he has mixed heritage. Especially southern Egyptians can be quite dark-skinned as that region has had contact with Nubia, modern Sudan, for thousands of years. Yellowstar012 says, could be, but we don't know. He could just be a black dude, either American, from one of the many African nations, or European that practice Islam, which is very common. We never seen anything that states that he's officially Arab. And to those that don't know, not all Arabs are Muslims, and not all Muslims are Arabs. r/AskScienceFiction. Totalwink says, Spawn, what is Spawn made of? What is Spawn made of? Is necroplasm biological matter or strictly supernatural in nature? Abe2Sapien says, necroplasm. It seems that his power is limited to his imagination, similar to Green Lantern, in a sense, but he can be drained without a direct connection to the power of hell. C_Fix5048 says, I think making a list of everyone in your life who has ever called you a popular girl is a good start to a no contact list. Boo_and_Minsk_ says, necroplasm is supernatural. Poorly Drawn Beagle says, it's the same kind of matter hell is made out of, and it responds to sentient thought in some ways. Darth Tipo92 says, strictly supernatural. He has his original mortal body held together by necroplasm, and without a direct connection to hell he's on a limited supply that degrades with each use. Eventually he'll run out of necroplasm and either die again, or be trapped in his rotting flesh. r/AskScienceFiction. Houndwolf Squad says, Star Wars, is Darth Vader's mask meant to be kinda scary/terrifying? Dumb question, but ever since I was a kid, Vader's helmet/mask always gave off creepy vibes. Like a hulking inhuman knight wheezing at you. It's something got to do with the face. Something about it seems monstrous, like the big eyes, the triangular mouth. Normally a lot of masked characters aren't scary, some even look cool like Kylo Ren's helmet. But Vader's features seem kinda demonic. Is that something that was meant to be, as in, inspire fear, or is his kind of helmet pretty standard? The closest thing I can think of are the Dark Trooper helmets, they are scary too. Strawberry Top 3457 says, the situation strive for fear and despair, so of course yes, his suit is purposely also made flawed to cause him pain. Careful Passenger 2318 says, not sure about Lucas' original vision as far as that goes, but in canon, yes. Serenity_B says, the mask and armor was based on old Sith aesthetic design, and intimidating was definitely a theme the Sith worked into most of their decor and style choices. Ifa94 says, he is a evil space wizard who thrives on the fear of his enemies and uses fear as a weapon. It's definitely intentional. Just look at the ending scene in Rogue One, he goes to rather extreme lengths only to scare his enemies. r/AskScienceFiction. Mountain Alarm 7093 says, DC, are there any villains where Batman doesn't lock up in Arkham Asylum? Zero Quick says, Batman likes to leave Beast to die. Lord Salcius says, he typically uses lethal force on Solomon Grundy, since he's a revenant/plant person thing, and can revive himself. Poorly Drawn Beagle says, any not ruled insane by the court system. Razdan Ninja says, Bane, when Batman faces him as a villain, he is more often tossed into Blackgate Penitentiary, because even though he is often depicted as a psychopathic murderer, he is generally of sound enough mind to be aware that he is committing crimes, and is fully intent on performing said crimes. Not because of a mental condition that he is dealing with or without the venom addiction, he's just kinda into the whole crime thing. r/AskScienceFiction. Lead Chipmunk says, Super Mario, where do the blue spiky shells come from? The only people we see with spiky shells are Bowser and Bowser Jr., both of which have green shells. Also Dry Bones Bowser, which might be a separate character. So where are they getting those shells from? Side question, if Bowser and his progeny are Koopas, like the Troopers, but bigger and spiky, are there some Koopas somewhere with spiky shells in red, orange, yellow, purple, black, and white? Archporn says, where do any of the shells come from? The Koopas are just wearing them. They are not their packages, like how it works for turtles. I'm guessing they're either getting them from dead turtles or just making them. Maybe there's some special kind of spiked blue turtle. Maybe they just paint it and add spikes. Very 123 says, okay, so, spoilers for the movie. But there is an actual scene that explains it. The blue shells are special generals, or soldiers, or whatever you want to call it, that are like paratroopers, except high ranking of some sort. When Mario almost got away from one of those blue shell troopers, it decided to get in its shell, I guess for the same reason as regular Koopas do, and fly towards Mario's cart, suicide bombing himself in the process. So basically, blue shells actually have a Koopa inside, a Koopa who most likely chooses who to attack, and in the games, that person it chooses is the one in first place, but they don't necessarily have to, seeing as Mario in the movie wasn't going first as far as I know. Highwalker 22765 says, from behind. r/AskScienceFiction. Leroy Agnesty says, Star Wars, who is the physically strongest person in Star Wars? I'm mainly looking for people whose strength comes from their body itself, but if there are people who augment their strength through technology or the Force, they're worth a mention as well. Xeno Riot says, I think Jabba is strongest. Hutts are very strong in general, and he's a prime example of the species. Though what he could actually do with that strength is debatable. Chewie is probably the most physically capable person, based on natural muscle alone. Grievous augments will make him very strong, but they are cybernetic in nature. Then, of course, if we look to capability in manipulating physical objects via the Force, then Yoda's ability is unmatched and far eclipses any of the above mentioned people. Darth Tipo 92 says, most likely Berg. He's a Devaronian bounty hunter active after the Battle of Endor. While we only see him for a short while, he's been shown tearing apart combat droids with his bare hands as well as lifting blast doors on his shoulders and surviving being crushed by secondary blast doors and being impervious to flamethrowers. Might not seem like much compared to Zeb and Wookiees, but he's an exception compared to his species rather than comparable to other members like Chewbacca and Zeb are. Matt the Smither says, of the characters we know, and ignoring creatures who do not have sophisticated thoughts like Wampus and Rankers. Probably Chewbacca/other Wookiees or Bootsk. Also, I believe the Hutts are canonically very strong creatures. r/AskScienceFiction. Smorthan_software says, Annabelle, can Annabelle be weaponized? According to the paranormal occurrences surrounding Annabelle the Cursed Doll, there is evidence that she is able to move on her own from the accounts of Donna and Angie. Plant psychic scars as described by Angie's boyfriend Lau. And remotely trigger premature deaths or accidents as seen with the museum visitor who mocked the doll and was killed in a motorcycle accident immediately after. With these abilities considered, if a country at war were to use her as a threat against their enemy, the enemy would react dismissively, likely even mockingly. Even if the enemy is aware of the doll's supposed curse, their public would still deny the doll's danger and mock the ridiculous threat. The plan is to have the enemy mock the threat, to trigger Annabelle to inflict harm on them, thus assisting the country in its war. Will this work? Or will it backfire on the country because they are technically exploiting the doll for warfare advantage? Blue 4029 says, Annabelle would be dangerous for all sides involved. What's the guarantee that she won't just turn on the country that used her? Or just used her effects on all countries in the world? A possessed doll is too unpredictable to be weaponized. Malfos 101 says, theoretically yes. But anytime someone tries to lawyer a demonic entity, there is the strong possibility of the entity doing something different to frick with them. Demonic entities love to frick with people, and few are bound by any significant rule set that they must follow. r/AskScienceFiction. Revenger Badger says, DC Universe, if Batman was committed only to gaining as much power as possible, what he be able to do? Let's say Bruce Wayne gave up his war against crime and all duties in his pursuit to make everyone who called him just some rich guy eat their words. Whether influence, abilities, or technology, how much power could he obtain? Insane Ranter says, he could touch platinum kryptonite to gain full Kryptonian powers, become a Green Lantern bearer, master magic, genetically tweak himself into a human/Kryptonian hybrid like Superboy, mix his genes with some other super race, fuse with a mother box. He's immensely capable of enhancing himself. Probably the person most able to do it, if he sets his mind to it. Influence wise, he can buy about as much influence as can be bought already, and he can easily use that to get himself into prestigious positions. He could easily be in the cabinet or a very senior UN position without even trying, and could throw money at elections to get into high office. That'll shut up anyone who thinks he's just one of the generic. Reese 1495 says. That's basically the Batman who laughs during death metal. r/AskScienceFiction. The real Cthulhu 24 says. Itchy and Scratchy, how is a xylophone not magic? In episode 2F09, when Itchy plays Scratch's skeleton like a xylophone, he hits the same rib twice, yet he produces two different notes. How is this possible? Darth Tipo 92 says. Itchy and Scratchy are a children's show within The Simpsons, and as such aren't bound by any laws or physics other than the FCC and copyright laws. Worse_username says. The first hit created an internal fracture, altering the bone's acoustic properties. Bishmas says. The tendons contract as they dry. The change in force on the rib changes the pitch. Second Creative says. Let me ask you a question. Why would a man whose shirt says genius at work spend all of his time watching a children's cartoon show? T02 says. The first strike loosened and crumbled some marrow inside the rib. This changed the acoustics, leading to a new note on second strike. Steamed Ham-Fisted says. A wizard did it. Credit to Reddit says. Maybe the key/rib is loose or cracked from previous injuries, causing a different tone to be emitted each time it's struck. r/AskScienceFiction. Lord of Darkness 51 says. Shazam, why did the wizard choose a child to be Shazam? Why did the wizard choose a child instead of an adult to be Shazam? You could say, because he could manipulate Billy, but after he gave him the powers he died in the New 52 version in the movie. I don't know if the wizard was still around before New 52. Why did the wizard choose a child and not an adult? Atlahawk 8357 says. In the DC movies, the wizard kept waiting for someone pure enough, but he couldn't find anyone in time. He settled on Billy. Old Dad Energy says. Astonishing_Flash has the right answer. Also, only a child would have the innate goodness to use Shazam's might for right. Last adult that Shazam empowered was Black Adam, and that ended badly. Yellow Star 012 says. Originally, even though he had a crappy life, orphan, homeless or living in a group home, bullied, Billy has a pure heart and still sees the best in people, and that whom the wizard wanted as a champion, the opposite of the previous champion. Astonishing_Flash says. If you really want to go with post-Flashpoint, it's directly because Billy was just who happened to be closest, and he didn't have any other choice because he was about to die. He was looking for someone truly righteous and couldn't find someone. So when Billy told him no one was totally good and that his standards were unreasonable, he relented and gave his power to Billy, since it was that or nothing. Before Flashpoint, he was able to find that righteous person, and that person happened to be a child. That's magic for ya. But he was also around for mentorship at the Rock of Eternity basically the entire time. r/AskScienceFiction. Lord of Darkness 51 says. DC, why are there blimps flying around in Gotham City? One of Gotham's most famous characteristic are the blimps in the sky, but what are they for? Reese 30 Stupid says. Similar to u/Periphery 72271 mentioned, but I can suggest a few other ideas. One is advertising, which is what blimps are used for nowadays. It's big and in the sky, so people will obviously see it. The other? Maybe an in-the-air dining venue for the extravagantly rich. I mean, there are rich people willing to eat their dinner while being hoisted by a crane. LT_Rooney says. To add on to what /u/periphery 72271 said, airships make great sense for long-term surveillance. They have nearly infinite airtime, since they only need to burn fuel to maneuver. If you have one tower you can use as a docking port, which the GCPD does have at Police HQ, you don't even need to deal with the difficult landing and takeoff process for crew rotation. Each one of those airships is doing the job of an entire fleet of helicopters at a fraction of the cost and silently. Poorly Drawn Beagle says. Probably police surveillance blimps. Periphery 72271 says. To monitor for crime and trouble spots. Cheaper and easier to use than helicopters. Have you seen the crazy stuff that goes on a daily basis in Gotham? r/AskScienceFiction. Exotic Shock says. Ryard inverse / general mythology. Are there any Egyptian demigods? What is their equivalent for someone like Hercules or Percy Jackson? In the Ryard inverse, which is made up of the Percy Jackson books, their various spin-offs, we have seen demigods come from the Greek, Roman, Norse pantheons, yet none for the Egyptian. Are there any Egyptians demigods that actually exist? Why aren't they as prevalent as in the other mythologies? What would the closest analog be for someone whom one of their parents was immortal, the other an Egyptian god / deity? Weirdo_NB says. Don't think there are. The closest equivalent to my knowledge are the pharaoh bloodlines, which is more the children of humans who were hosts to the gods. Banks101 says. The Egyptian gods in the Ryard inverse are operating kind of on the level as the Egyptian gods in the MCU. They're there, but they don't interact with it much. They prefer to be worshipped, and thus allow magicians to use their power or even become hosts for them. See Carter and Sadie being hosts for Horus and Isis. I don't think they can even actually be in the world without a host. Sure, there's Bast, but she's still using Sadie's cat as a host. Poorly Drawn Beagle says. No, the Egyptian gods in this series don't appear to have children with mortals. To interact with the physical world they just sort of possess a human host, for preference one with pharaonic heritage. Mugenhunt says. The Egyptian gods have a different deal going on where they allow sorcerers trained in Egyptian magics to channel or harness their power. The Kane Chronicles are an account of how this works. r/AskScienceFiction. Majin Mega says. Pokemon, why did we need a special device to see the ghost Pokemon from Red and Blue? By the next generation we could catch them casually with no need for the scope. King Reaper says. There's a few likely possibilities. 1. A Sylph scope becomes standard equipment. The Pokemon Red/Blue world is not as used to Pokemon existing as future game worlds are, so dealing with ghost types is a new problem at the time and the solution hasn't been standardized, but later on it is. 2. Your character in later games is slightly psychic, and thus inherently able to see ghosts. This isn't that rare an ability in the Pokemon world, and may have become more common the longer Pokemon had been around. Edit, or, probably least satisfyingly 3, the same change in universe that moves you to a reality where Steel is a Pokemon type also moves you to a reality where ghost types are naturally visible. Bonnet656 says. By the next generation the Sylph scope is built into the Pokédex. The one we see in Red's adventure in Kanto is a prototype. Lord Salcius says. Because it wasn't a ghost type Pokemon, it was the ghost of a Pokemon. r/AskScienceFiction. Heptapod says. DC Comics, what is a Mythobox anyway? Is it like the apocalypse version of a Earth smartphone? Magic_Mayhem21 says. It's kinda hard to explain for several reasons. 1. It changes depending on which storyline. And 2. It's such a multi-item. Basically moth-barks are supercomputers, but far more advanced than anything we have on Earth. They tend to be semi or completely sentient, and can basically do anything. They open boom tubes, portals, communicate vast expanses of space, convert matter, manipulate tech. Oftentimes a moth-barks is involved in making cyborgs, so there's a biological factor to them. Poorly Drawn Beagle says, it's a sentient PDA from New Genesis. It comes with many functions including a translator, a protective shield, an instant disguise, a boom tube opening device, even calming music for when Orion hulks out. Mugen Hunt says, it's a New Genesis device. It is very similar to the human smartphone, but is a living computer system that has a lot of different features. It can manipulate molecules, it can generate boom tubes, the powerful portals that allow you to travel to and from the fourth world of the new gods. They can serve as communication devices, generate illusions, and in some cases even give advice. All with a friendly, ping 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 sound. Darkseid and his minions do not use moth-barks. A few of his henchmen have made use of a knockoff copy of moth-barks, but in general they aren't given anything as powerful or flexible. Darkseid prefers to have his minions be limited in what they can do, and to believe that the only things that they can get power from are the technology that Darkseid provides. r/AskScienceFiction. Few Objective 6526 says, MCU did Odin know that at least one planet of his 9 realms has the celestial inside? Periphery 72271 says, I don't know how we'd know the answer to that question. If he did, he never mentioned it, so it must not have seemed too relevant. I see Veterinarian 785 says, I'm not entirely sure. I'd assume he knew and just couldn't figure out how to safely get the thing out of Midgard. Mirage 2101 says, the Celestial got to Earth an awfully long time ago. Despite the creation myths that the gods take part in, there are different pantheons. The question is their complete history really happened, or if it's written retroactively when humans started to worship the gods? There's just a lot we don't know. Going by 616, even Odin wouldn't take a celestial lightly. It's likely celestials could hide from him if they'd bother. r/AskScienceFiction. Few Objective 6526 says, MCU Iago looks like a brain, while all the other celestials look like dudes in fancy armor? Denji_the_Shinji says, the simple explain is that Ego lied. His name is basically Ego, and he view himself higher than any mortal, so it's a given. Richard MHP says, you don't know what they look like inside the armor. Also, but, are you karma farming? Dion Onion Soon says, because he wasn't born of a celestial seed, thus lacking the physical form of one. Horn_Python says, the others built themselves mega bodies around their brain, but Ego decided to make a planet. Johnny_Topside59 says, there's a theory that he's the brain from the severed head of nowhere. Mugen Hunt says, my theory is that Ego is a failed celestial, that he didn't develop properly into a cosmic being like the rest, and that the process of using a planet to incubate him went wrong somehow, and we got that instead. r/AskScienceFiction. Eric Davis 7 says, Transformers. How do Transformers exist in universe? Okay, so technology and how it functions and all that was built by humans, right? Like sure, maybe some alien races out there doing the same things we doing, but how did the universe itself one day just decided to create a bunch of highly advanced wires in a way so advanced it forms sentient beings who are basically no literally human except metal? I know about Unicorn, his brother the creator, and all that. How did the creator even get such an idea? Poorly Drawn Beagle says, There's really 3 prevailing theories behind the evolution of Transformers. Firstly, a secular/naturalistic, though strange, explanation that they simply assembled out of naturally occurring levers and pulleys. Secondly, a supernatural explanation, as you say, that a deity chose to make them that way. Thirdly, that they were the creations of another race that abandoned them a long time ago, and their sentience was largely an accident. Most Transformers seem to find this offensive. A variant of the third, the Transformers sometimes exist in the same universe as the GoBots, who started organic and slowly replaced bits of themselves until they were wholly mechanical. It's possible this origin could have applicability to the Cybertronians, especially in the TFA continuity, where GoBots seem to have been the first rulers of Cybertron. r/AskScienceFiction. Ninman5 says, 1984, did the Ministry of Truth let a rat eat Winston's face or not? Led Chipmunk says, and Winston was shouting frantically over and over, do it to Julia. Do it to Julia. Not me. Julia. I don't care what you do to her. Tear her face off, strip her to the bones. Not me. Julia. Not me. He was falling backwards into enormous depths, away from the rats. He was still strapped in the chair, but he had fallen through the floor, through the walls of the building, through the earth, through the oceans, through the atmosphere, into outer space, into the gulfs between the stars, always away, away, away from the rats. He was light years distant, but O'Brien was still standing at his side. There was still the cold touch of wire against his cheek. But through the darkness that enveloped him, he heard another metallic click and knew that the cage door had clicked shut and not open. Nope. He gave in and told them what they wanted, which was to take Julia instead, and that saved him from the rats. Gargamel says, no, he didn't. And I think that was the point both of his ordeal in the Ministry of Love and that of the broken men drinking gin all day. They cached and abandoned both dignity and principles before anything was really done to them. To be fair, this was because the system chose to prey on their biggest fears, knowing what would make them give in before the torture was physically applied to them. But in Winston's mind and those of the other victims, they likely felt that BB was right and they were just spineless whiners with no real ideals and no real cause. It was actually an excellent way to kill rebellion. No martyrs created for the cause to celebrate, just a constant trickle of rebels who themselves chose to give up the rebellion, making any rebellion seem pointless to the young who saw them. r/AskScienceFiction. Specialist Star 840 says, Lord of the Rings, would the first orcs have been more elf-like? In the Fellowship of the Ring, Saruman tells his Uruk-hai that orcs were originally elves that were corrupted and tortured by the forces of evil. What were these first orcs like? Would they have been more elf-like in appearance and mannerisms than later orcs? Note, I know Tolkien never officially settled on an origin for the orcs, but I'm going with the explanation that they were corrupted elves, because that's the origin given in the published version of the Silmarillion as well as the movies. Drafterman says, even with your note, I think it is important to understand and consider that information given to us by characters in the media is not always reliable. The Silmarillion, like both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, does not have an omniscient narrator. Rather, all of them are translations of in-universe works from contemporary authors containing a collection of first, second, and third-hand accounts. The Silmarillion account is what the elves generally believe, and I think it is reasonable to suggest that this is where Saruman got his own knowledge, since he would have no other source for it anyway. All that said, if we were to assume that this origin story is correct, then I think, necessarily, as you trace the lineage back, they would become physically and mentally more elf-like. Zachalwa123 says, no. Even if they were originally bred from elves, and they probably were, even though as others have pointed out that's not 100% confirmed, remember that they were bred by Morgoth. He cannot create, he can only pervert, destroy, and mock. The winged dragons were mockeries of the great eagles of man. Lord of the West, does Morg resemble an eagle? Of course not, because the taint of Morgoth's corruption is on the dragons, just as it was on the orcs. r/AskScienceFiction. Tyrannid 457 the second one says, Poltergeist. What was the poltergeist doing with the toy car? One of the ghost scientists remarks about how he saw a ghost moving a toy car across a linoleum floor over a span of 7 hours. This was the most impressive evidence of ghosts that he ever got on camera prior to the Freeling house. Since the scientists are depicted as smart and capable, plus the fact that the paranormal actually exists in the movie's world, it is likely that this was actually a supernatural event and not a hoax or misunderstanding of natural phenomena. With that in mind, why would a poltergeist spend time slowly moving a toy car for 7 hours instead of rolling it quickly or throwing it? Icon Dark says, perhaps from the spirit's point of view it was rolling it quickly across the floor. The spirit could be experiencing time differently than the living. Pocket Buckle says, the thing about the house in Poltergeist is that it's chock full of bad juju from being built on a cemetery. It probably has a ton of psychic energy that makes it easy for the ghosts to interact. It's easy for stuff to happen there either because 1. The ghosts are already there, or 2. The ghosts are super pissed off. Any other house that the investigator witnessed before was probably not built on a cemetery, so there would probably be less spiritual energy. Thus, any ghost attempting to manifest something would probably have to work that much harder to do so. If it wanted to move a car to scare someone, it could. It would just take a while. Conabud says, it's a ghost, he does what he wants. Time has no meaning. Lexstrom says, look at the movie Ghost. The subway ghost is lashing out at commuters, and Sam has to work hard to interact with the living. It takes time, energy, and lots of strong emotions. That ghost pushing that car is probably trying very hard to make contact. Or it's a ghost kid trying to play with a toy. r/AskScienceFiction. Zajaz says, X-Men would Wolverine's healing factor stop working if he was hit with a dose, say, or 1,000 times more powerful than that needed to kill an average person? Shouldn't the radiation damage his DNA to the point where his immune system, for all intents and purposes, cease to exist? Nepin says, his regeneration isn't fully dependent on biology or genetics. Unless you kill him, giving him a massive radiation dose won't reliably take him down, because his regeneration can just slowly outpace the damage. Weapon_X141 says, I might be wrong about this, but in Force Wolverine was facing a horseman of Kid Apocalypse that could give basically anyone any disease, virus, and sickness known to man in seconds. Phantom X had to save him because his healing factor was getting overloaded. Mugen Hunt says, yes. His healing factor is strong but not omnipotent. People might reference the one time he was able to recover from a nuclear weapon, but that was later revealed to be outside interference by a demon. In general, there is a point where Wolverine can be killed through sufficient force. r/AskScienceFiction. Of_Kiltus says, the Princess Bride, why didn't the six-fingered man take Domingo Montoyas' sword? The greedy and incredibly unhonorable six-fingered man, a massive coward that ran from Inigo and tried to cheat Domingo out of the money he deserved for the perfectly crafted sword that supposedly has no equal. Why did he not just take this incredible one-of-a-kind sword? Isn't that why he killed Domingo? To take the sword? How does Inigo still have it? Last_Strawberry 9904 says, one theory I read online was that, in the time between Count Rugen killing Domingo and scarring Inigo, an angry crowd had formed. Rugen might be a skilled fencer, but there's no way he had any chance in a 10-to-1 fight. so he just rode off instead, leaving Inigo with the sword. And as everyone here has already mentioned, it's not like he was losing much seeing as he never actually paid for the sword. Curazon says, it can be hard to understand the mindset of people who are that narcissistic. By refusing to give him the sword without proper payment, Domingo implied that the exchange was a deal between equals, who could make demands of each other. Killing Domingo and refusing the sword were both ways of showing that the six-fingered man was above Domingo's station. To show that Domingo was so far beneath him that the sword couldn't be worth anything because Domingo had made it. That even killing Domingo would be a casual gesture. Treneratus says, the six-fingered man is obviously a sadist as well as a coward. Leaving Inigo alive with the sword was just another way of torturing him by leaving him with not only the scars, but the object his father died over as a reminder of his failure. r/AskScienceFiction. Toby_Vedo says, Netflix's Castlevania, what does God think of the events of the show? Guardian PK says, this is talking about whatever reality that one is, that kind of franchise's version, yes? Superstar Platinum says, thanks for killing all the monsters for me, Trevor. Especially that death parasited thing. You are still going hell for have pre-martial sex with that witch. Also for all those times you took my name in vain and ate shellfish. Reese30 Stupid says, well, he's definitely present and helpful in his own way. But doesn't suffer fools lightly. The blue-fanged demon outright states that yes, God is present and is bestowing his blessings on those who genuinely believe in him and are faithful. But also points out that those who abuse his name and blessings have had his protection revoked, outright stating that he and the other demons were permitted into the church because the bishop had lost his favor when he condemned Lisa to the pyre and provoked Dracula's rage upon Wallachia. It was also because the bishop had perverted the Lord's teachings and had led his flock astray into sin, and is implied that he had the Belmonts excommunicated for his own selfish desires. It is also shown that God acts in unusual ways that have great benefits in the long term. Carmela was able to direct the bishop's reanimated corpse to bless a lake into holy water, meaning it was allowed to be blessed by God. But this directly backfired on Carmilla when that same lake decimated her army shortly after. And it's heavily implied that, while Dracula was confined to hell when he died, Lisa was only down there because being reunited with her husband was her heaven. And when he was brought back to life later, he had considerably mellowed out since he was reunited with her. r/AskScienceFiction. Few Objective 6526 says, MCU, it doesn't look like evolution is capable of randomly creating extremely powerful creatures like Thanos or Odin. Does it mean their ancestors probably started as something close to regular human race and genetically engineered themselves? Thamaskal says, Jane Foster recognized the Asgardians' magic healing table as some sort of genetic doohickey. I'm murdering it because I haven't seen Thor: The Dark World in years, but it's clear that the Asgardians do have the ability to perform genetic engineering. Dion Onion Soon says, I think in the case of Asgardians it's a question of what resources, magic, element, artifacts that affected their biochemistry and access to certain technology. As far as Thanos goes, his powers are simply being a great tactician and kind of a piece of he's certainly just a normal alien. He just maintains access to artifacts, people, and tactics that keep him in a godlike status. BW_bird says, often yes, they usually do start out not unlike humans and become something more powerful. But not everything in Marvel follows the same evolutionary path as we do. This is a universe full of magic, myth, and cosmic beings with powers beyond our comprehension. A powerful, hyper-advanced alien race just suddenly popping into existence around the start of the universe for reasons we may find nonsensical as rare, but not unheard of. Periphery 72271 says. Thanos in one universe is a descendant of generations of a celestial experiment, so no evolution was involved. Odin is the grandson of a creator deity who was born to this dimension from ice, Buri. Not a lot of evolution can come from 3 generations. r/AskScienceFiction. Axa51 says. Marvel, what would Tony's personality be like if he took the Super Solider Serum? Would it bring out the good more, the bad more, or a mixture of both? Although I guess his alcoholism wouldn't be able to affect him anymore. Specifically thinking of the MCU's take. Robot in the Swamp says. Super Solider Serum, super solid, obviously. He would not go through the kind of breakdown he did during the Mandarin and Extremis affair after the fire nuclear missile through a portal incident. He might also be more amenable to listening to Captain America when they clash that time in Siberia. Yellow Star 012 says. The serum maximize your own qualities to peak level, so, on that token, it would make Tony a wee more intelligent with a rocking bod. Logistics 515 says. Both good and bad, especially as how Tony's flaws are some of the more obvious out of all the MCU characters. So I'm imagining a perfect human physique with a Reed Richards intellect, or even above that, that's coupled with being used to practical applications instead of theory. At that point I think all those X-Buster suits he built wouldn't be on the level of I can now reasonably take you on, but more like you don't stand a chance in hell. The bad, I imagine, would be how MCU Tony was all about preemptive action and tended to see things mostly from his own perspective first, others later. So worst case scenario is some sort of protector god complex where he's spending all his time creating elaborate systems to protect humanity, while simultaneously protecting them so much that all of their effective humanity is squashed in the process. Protection first, actual society and culture an afterthought. So, something like Orwell's 1984, Huxley's Brave New World, and Cameron's Terminator franchise all mashed up together. That's all for this video. Was it good? I know not, for I'm a robot. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. This video is the product of an automated process.